Good day, everyone, and welcome to Kwibuka 28. Welcome to His Excellency Eugene Segore Kayihura, High Commissioner of Rwanda to South Africa. Welcome to His Excellency Dr. P. Vijay Luchman, High Commissioner of Mauritius. Welcome to Talinate, Executive Director and Founder of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. Her Excellency Chantal Itoiwa Apoyolo, Ambassador of the Republic of Congo. His Excellency Mohamed Iklarif, Ambassador of the Republic of Algeria. Welcome to Her Excellency Ms. Catherine Dinga, High Commissioner of Kenya to South Africa. Dr. Odusola, United Nations Development Program Resident Representative, welcome. Mr. Gideon Yohana, Deputy Head of Mission in the Nigerian Embassy, welcome. Mrs. Griet Brozens, Deputy Head of Mission in the Embassy of the Kingdom of Belgium. His Excellency Mr. Findakba Dekalega, Head of Affairs of the Embassy of Togo. Mr. Barry Salzman, artist and creator of today's exhibition that will be launched today in this event, welcome. Dr. Precious Moloi Motsepe, Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, welcome. We welcome all those of you who are joining us via live stream and via Zoom. This year's theme is Remember, Unite, and Renew. 28 reminds us that it was only 28 years ago, on this day in 1994, in Rwanda, that the genocide against the Tutsi began and would last for the next 100 days. It is with this remembrance and hard and difficult memory that we remember and commemorate this genocide for the next 100 days, starting today. I would like us to please stand as we listen to the national anthems of Rwanda and then the national anthem of South Africa. After the national anthems, I would ask us to please remain standing so that we can observe 1 minute of silence. Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you for observing that 1 minute of silence and for listening to the national anthems. It's always a very emotional experience when one listens to our country's anthem because it has so many layers. And so you always feel the emotions. So thank you very much for that. It is now my privilege to invite Executive Director Tali Nates to invite us. However, before I invite her, I would like to say thank you to the Ambassador of Tanzania for gracing us with your presence. Thank you very much for being here. And so I would like to invite Tali Nates to please address us. Thank you.
High Commissioner of the Republic of Rwanda in South Africa, Your Excellency Eugene Segoe Kayihura, High Commissioner of Mauritius, His Excellency Mr. Lachman, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors of Tanzania, Ambassadors of Togo, Ambassadors of Congo, Ambassadors or embassies of Belgium, and many other members of the diplomatic corps that are gracing us with your presence today. Special mention to the survivors of the genocide against the Tutsi. It is important that you are with us today. UCT Chancellor Dr. Moloi Motsepe, UN representatives joining us today, artist Barry Saltzman, whose exhibition we are opening today, dignitaries, friends, welcome to the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. It is very meaningful to hold this annual Kwibuka ceremony all together, gathering here, this time Kwibuka 28, to commemorate in partnership and in support of each other the memory of those who were murdered in Rwanda 28 years ago. Today, we mark 28 years since the start of the genocide in Rwanda, which started on the 7th of April of 1994. It was a deliberate, intentional, and systematic mass killing that targeted the Tutsi population in the country. The genocide lasted for about 3 months, and approximately 1 million Tutsi, which is actually 3/4 of the Tutsi population of Rwanda. Just imagine that, 3/4 of the population. The Tutsi population of Rwanda were brutally murdered. Of course, others were targeted too: politically moderate Hutu, Twa, men, women, children were also killed. The theme of this year's commemoration is Remember, Unite, and Renew. Here at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, we remember those who were murdered. We confront hate in all its forms. We strive to unite against hate, and we educate about lessons for humanity that renew our commitment to learn from history and their consequences. Our wounded world, where war and attacks on civilians are happening in front of us today, everywhere, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa. And we need to reflect and learn from history more than ever before. And this is what we try to do here at the center, because of course in April of 1994, we in South Africa celebrated democracy. We celebrated bringing our first democratic president Nelson Mandela to power, while in Rwanda, genocide was happening. In this center, we share the stories of men, women, and children who lived in villages, towns, and cities, yet were murdered one by one, not for anything that they have done, but simply because they were born Tutsi, because of who they were born to be. Many survivors have the need to find out how their loved ones were murdered, to recover their remains, to give them a dignified burial if possible. And one such survivor that we have in our exhibition, which I invite you all to look at after the ceremony, is Xavier, whose entire family was killed before and during the genocide. And he lived for a few years in Johannesburg, so we knew him very, very well, because he volunteered for us and he went to speak at many schools and share his testimony. After sharing his testimony with one of the schools, it was St. Stephen's Girls' College, the girls of the college, they were only 14 or 15 years old, decided to fundraise and send him back to Rwanda because he wanted to uncover what happened to his family. In those days, 2009, 2010, the Gacaca courts were happening around Rwanda, and he indeed went in front of the Gacaca court. And he discovered that his father, Mushatsi Edouard, was killed much before the genocide, on the 23rd of January 1991, during those early attacks and massacres that were happening in the country. He was killed in a roadblock in Rugeshi village. Actually, one of the killers, Bandora, confessed to the murder, and he helped Xavier to locate his father's remains. Xavier also discovered what happened to his mother, the Bereho Beatrice. She actually was hidden by one of the neighbors, a Hutu neighbor, Marciana, who really tried to save her life. But then she was tracked down, the neighbor was threatened, and the Interahamwe killed Beatrice on the 9th of April, 1994. He also discovered that all his brothers and sisters, all of them, and let me name them, because we do need to remember the names, not only the numbers. Birimigiro Bernard, Ngabire Marie-Golet, Karageya Jean de Dieu, Kadushi Celestine, Kagofero Pierre, Kana Claude, and Kekekeye Clement, she was only 7 years old at the time, were brutally murdered. As I said, it is important to say all their names. Remember this one family among so many who were murdered during the genocide. When Xavier located and exhumed his mother's remains, she was still wearing her rosary and holding the key to her house. On the 9th of May 2010, Beatrice and Edouard's remains were buried together in one coffin at the Mukamira Memorial Site. And you can see much more about this story in our exhibition, including the rosary and the key, who were donated to our center. In our exhibition, thanks to the close partnership with the CNLG and the Kigali Genocide Memorial, we tell stories of many other victims and survivors. Our memorial to the victims feature items of clothing, shoes, rosaries, utensils, and more. All whose items are displaced, sadly, tragically, were murdered at the Catholic churches of Nyamata and Narama in the Bugusera region near Kigali. Now we must remember that the churches were seen as a place of refuge place of safety by many of the victims. They ran to the churches, hoping to be protected. And with them, they brought cooking utensils, clothes, crockery, cutlery, school books, and their most cherished belongings. But sadly, the church was not safe. In Nyamata, the frightened Tutsi locked the iron entrance door, hiding inside the church, but on 10th of April, the Interahamwe forced their way in and murdered everyone inside. More than 10,000 were murdered in that church alone. More than 5,000 Tutsi congregated in Narama Church after being convinced by the authorities that they would be safe there. The majority of the victims were killed with hand grenades and face-to-face killing. Anyone who survived was attacked and killed. And of course, we have the remains of what remained from them downstairs to remind us of what happened to those individuals. It is crucial to tell those stories of individuals rather than just numbers. We are tempted by numbers, 1 million, 5,000, 10,000, but it's one by one by one. Each one of them had a life, had a name, had an identity, and hopes for the future, and we need to remember them. To end, let me quote Antoinette, a survivor of the genocide, that reflected about the importance of telling her story. And she said, "I need to find the strength to tell my story. If I don't, it is like denying the genocide. If I, the only survivor of my family, die without telling my history, it will die with me. The name of my family will disappear forever. I want my child to learn about our history. I don't want it to be hidden." Let us all remember. Let us all today remember and never forget. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Nate. And especially for reiterating the message that each of the victims had a name, because I think often we get caught up in statistics for research purposes or for the sake of expediency in telling a story. You just focus on the statistics. But each of those victims had a name. In the entrance of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, there's a wall titled the Wall of Memory. And that wall commemorates each of those victims and emphasizes that each of them had a name. So I would invite you to have a look at that wall. And also, I would like to take this opportunity to please ask all of us to please switch our phones off. If you must have it on, please put it on silent so that it doesn't disturb our event today. And then next, I would like us to watch a very special video that has been created especially for this event today. So I would like us to take a few minutes to watch and take in these images.
There are genocide memorial sites everywhere in Rwanda. At Songa, on the roadside. At Kabgayi, by the first colonial monastery. At Kibuye, in the stadium. At Butari, in the university where teaching staff killed their own students and colleagues. At Nyarirambo, on the outskirts of the capital city. And at Nyanza, where several thousand frightened Tutsi were slaughtered as the UN they had sought shelter with left them at the mercy of their killers. in churches, those still functioning, and those where bones lie on the floor waiting for someone to give their existence some meaning. And so, genocide is everywhere. If this were not difficult enough, today hundreds of thousands of killers are either in jail awaiting trial or living in their houses in impunity. Memorials bring respect to the dead, but are not just about the past. Survivors today are deeply wounded. Memorials are an acknowledgement of their loss.
ubwo rero ngewe iyo mpaje mpaza mpasanga abanjye mpaza nk'uko najya gusura umuntu w'umuryango. Aha rero habaye umuryango mugari, ni umuryango mugari w'abantu barokotse jenoside, kuko abo twahashyinguye ubu niho iwabo, ubwo rero natwe niho iwacu. Kuri jyewe rero aha ni mu muryango.
Urwibutso runyibutsa byinshi. Nduzi kuva mu mwaka w'2001 igihe twashyinguraga bwa mbere, ntabwo ari uko nguko hari hateye, ariko ukuntu hateye ubu ngubu bigaragara yuko ari ahantu hazamara imyaka myinshi kandi akatwigisha byinshi, akigisha abana tuzabyara, akigisha abavuye imihanda yose amahanga, akigisha abanyamahanga, ndetse akanababwira n'ibyabaye ku itsembabwoko ryabaye mu Rwanda.
C'est un centre qui m'a rendu mon enfance et mon passé, parce que les Boers avaient arraché tout ça chez moi. Alors je n'avais plus de chez moi, je n'avais plus de l'endroit de chez mon mari, donc je n'avais plus d'enfance et plus de passé. Et avec Gisozi, j'y retrouve les miens vivants, avec leurs photos. C'est comme si je revoyais leur sourire, c'est comme si je revoyais leur bonheur, leur joie. Donc je viens ici vraiment en famille, et comme s'ils étaient encore vivants. C'est un endroit que j'adore beaucoup, qui me donne une impression de les avoir éternisés, parce qu'ils ne sont pas morts ici, ils sont encore vivants et ils le seront pour toujours.
Perhaps when the value of life is once again elevated, it will diminish fear, so that young people can trust each other and build a foundation for reconciliation and democracy.
It will take generations for Rwanda to not to forget, but to be secured, for people to trust each other again, to live together as one again, the way they used to. The impact of this is too great, yeah. But I hope things will get better. I hope this will teach people, yeah.
Memorials are also important for the international community and for policymakers to reflect on our past failures to prevent genocide and about our responsibility to protect those who remain under threat, both now and in the future.
My name is Inga Verhaert and I'm a member of the Belgian Parliament. My impression of this museum is that it has been very well laid out. It tells a very human story of an inhuman problem, and it is so important that lots of people get to see this, especially younger people, because if we don't know the history...
Those who have never been to Rwanda do not know what genocide is. The scale of genocide and the purpose is what distinguishes genocide from other crimes.
We try as an organization and as an embassy to take all our visitors to Gisosi as one of the first elements of the program here. The first day or the second day we organize for them to visit Gisosi, and I think all of them that have been there so far have been really grateful that we have done this.
This memorial is a testimony to the agony that the Rwandan people went through in 1994.
It's the message it gives, that this bad act of genocide was committed in Rwanda, and what's important today is to ensure that such a thing doesn't happen in Rwanda or other places in Africa.
Genocide is not an event. Genocide is a process. It can virtually be predicted. You can see it. Therefore, genocide is preventable. I hope the experience of Rwanda shows to all of us that genocide can be prevented. We are all guilty. The world could have done more. General Dallaire said if he was given authority, not even the means, he wanted authority, he would have ended the genocide. We can learn from the guilt of the world.
Obviously, there is need for further contributions to keep it alive and to keep it part of society. I think it's also important to make sure that new documents are integrated into the center, and that also costs something.
So we need to understand the unique experience that this country has gone through. I hope the world will prevent another Rwanda in future.
Chikangoro.
Thank you. Maybe we can take 20 seconds just in silence again to absorb and process what we've just watched, because there was a very powerful film. Just 20 seconds in silence. Thank you. Thank you. It is now my privilege at this point in time to invite His Excellency Dr. Luchman, High Commissioner of Mauritius, to please address us.
Thank you, Mr. Antuli, Master of Ceremony. Before I start, let me acknowledge the High Commissioner of Rwanda, His Excellency Segure Kahiyura, and other High Commissioners and Ambassadors, especially Tanzania, sitting next to me. And then we have Ms. Tali Nates, Director of the Center. And then we have other ambassadors and high commissioners of Africa. Let me first of all welcome all of you as Mr. Anturi did. But yesterday or one day before, when the High Commissioner Segure Kayihura requested me to speak during this ceremony, I was at a loss because I did not know what to say. Also, previously, I have been attending 2 or 3 functions like this here before the pandemic. So I am used to this function, And I also feel the pain when I listen to Ms. Talinates giving the description and how people have been murdered. So it gives me really not pleasure to speak today, but pain. Because what the Rwandan people, especially the Tutsi, has got, it has engraved not only somewhere in the walls, as we see. Oh, I forgot to mention Mr. Salzman, also the artist, but it's engraved in our heart, the pain that we feel. So I immediately went on internet to find out what will I say today. And I got so much literature that I was also at a loss again. But I tried to work it out, and as you all know, Kwibuka 28, it's here, written there. It is 28 years after this sort of massacre or genocide, which says that we remember, unite, and renew. But at that time, there was more than 1 million Tutsi between 7th April and 15th July 1994, who were massacred by, we clearly don't know who, because there were a lot of people, organization and involved. During these 100 days, the Tutsi minority ethnic group, together with the moderate Hutu and the Twa Pygmies, were killed by armed militia. Now, who were involved? I tried to find out on the internet or in the literature who were involved, but I could not. What I saw is ordinary citizens, including government institutions, religious organizations, committed such atrocities against their own neighbor, churchmates, partners they used to intermarry and elderly. So do you understand? A partner whom you used to intermarry, you get him machete and kill he or her. This is terrible. So both the perpetrators and the victim, they were not strangers to each other. Remember that. If you are strangers, then I could realize your hate or any sort of animosity. But here, they were not strangers. The perpetrators and the victim shared the same common history in Rwanda, similar cultural values, same clan names, and same language. So, when you think deeply, how can we, people, human beings like us, perpetrate such crimes against our own people? The perpetrators tortured and killed their neighbors in cold blood. I think she mentioned already, Mr. Page. They're using clubs, hose, machete, rifle, through not only just killing, but dehumanizing acts, such as digging one's grave to bury oneself. I can't imagine. How can I dig my own grave and bury myself? It's out of imagination. Then hitting children against the wall, pushing them against the wall, purposely transmitting HIV/AIDS. I don't know, these people, they had HIV/AIDS and transmitted willingly, purposely. Rape women, and around 500,000 women were raped, and they also carried out cannibalism and drinking victims' blood. How can you imagine this? Human being, in this modern era, do cannibalism and drinks their own human blood, fresh blood, and so on. So things that happened in Rwanda during the 100 days, that was terrible. And it has gone down in history, and today we are witnessing this here. Unfortunately, during the ethnic cleansing of the Tutsi, no internal organizations, no any human rights authority raised their voice against such barbaric action. Okay, now when we listen to the news every day, we see UN, we see EU, a lot of, making the voice heard against what is happening in, which country is it? Ukraine, good, excellent. Sorry for the quiz question. So now when I tried to go in literature and find out what were the causes of conflict among people, especially now among nations, you will see in the literature ethnic cleansing was not new to Africa in the 1990s. Throughout history, as early as 335 BC, Alexander the Great institutionalized it after his victory over subdued nations, such as the Czechs, the Poles, the French, and the German. And since one of the testimony was speaking in French, je parle aussi français comme les autres. So in France, what was happened? Il y avait ce qu'on appelle épuration. Épuration is the cleansing everything. So this also, it went on during the Second World War, where the Croats affected cleansing terrain against Serbs. Cleansing terrain means clearing the land and so on against different people. At the apex of the Second World War, I think all of you remember, and it could be this center here. Maybe the thought of building this remembrance center came after the extermination of 6 million Jews in camps de concentration in Germany, which we call as Holocaust. Ethnic cleansing, such as forced migration, use of murder, rape, property destruction, arbitrary arrest, torture, which we see now, even nowadays. Like if you go back 2 years ago in the history of Myanmar, you will see the Rohingya Muslims being massacred, being uprooted from their own country. And when we even, after the Holocaust in Rwanda, now we can see what's happening now in Ukraine, Recently we see, when my PA was reading this, typing this for me, she said, High Commissioner, how can you speak of Ukraine now? I said, I am not afraid because things are facts, what's happening. So what's happening in Ukraine now, especially every day in the news we hear about the Bucha, which is near Kiev. And reportedly, daily we see on the news how killing of innocent people are considered as crime against humanity. I don't say it, it's Biden, the president of the US, who said it. So these are things which throughout history, how do we live when people like my own brothers and sisters kill me or kill someone else? How do you feel? So is there any humanity here? It's more than barbaric humanity. So when I went to look into the source of conflicts in Rwanda, I saw that the earliest inhabitant of Rwanda were the Twa, T-W-A, a group of Aboriginal pygmy hunters, hunter-gatherers, who settled in the area between 8,000 BC and 3,000 BC. This is not new. 8,000 before Christ, these people were there. So when you look at this, it becomes incomprehensible how people who have lived for millenniums in Rwanda can come and kill each other. And especially during the colonial period, we all know how the colonial masters were treating those colonized. And just skipping the history of Rwanda in the 18th or 19th century, what happened during the Berlin Conference. In 1884, the Berlin Conference assigned Rwanda and Burundi to Germany. The German colonizers favored the Tutsi over the Hutus when assigning administrative roles as racially superior people from Ethiopia. During the World War I, and as from 1926, the Belgians modernized Rwandan economy, maintained Tutsi supremacy against disenfranchised Hutu. Christian missionaries considered Tutsi as a caste from foreign origin with Ethiopian features against the Hutu. Then I skip again, long period. The Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, made several incursions under Paul Kagame, the actual Prime Minister. A command into Rwanda from, Uganda and the nearest countries. So, and since 1991, the Arusha Accords signed in 1993 included the RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, in a broad-based transition government. And all the recent developments are modern history and the foundation of a strong and successful government in Rwanda. Now, having seen all this, for us it's difficult to understand what we mean by ethnic cleansing, genocide. Okay, it's very difficult to understand because we have not gone through it. But at least you can make our mind. And when your neighbor is coming, your neighbor whom you have given food maybe at a certain time, come to kill you because simply you are a Tutsi and he's a Hutu. So how can we prevent this type of barbaric action by men against men? There are certain things which I think we can help to prevent ethnic cleansing, genocide, and extermination of people. It is believed that modernity, civilization, and international laws would prohibit crimes against humanity and prevent future genocide. But unfortunately, we see the contrary happening. When we take the example of Kosovo, when we go to Sudan in Darfur, when we go to Rwanda, as the leaders are involved nowadays in xenophobia, which even in South Africa, you have heard about it, racism, discrimination, and intolerance ingrained in human society. The roots of genocide have not been eradicated in the face of religious intolerance, which we see in many countries, indifference, skin color and race, ideology, and blaming others for our plight. Now, having seen all this, what can we do, we people of nowadays in different civilizations? How to contain genocides across the world? What we saw in literature, we have to understand genocide, study genocide, and offer courses at schools, high schools, and universities on the history, psychology, methodology, and motivation that would prevent future genocide, okay, together with audiovisual support technology. Now, public awareness campaign is to ensure that atrocities are remembered through social media and other media. Setting up and running Holocaust museum like this one is a good example of remembrance so that you can remember what has happened. Acknowledge that mass murders have occurred, like in Germany, the Holocaust, by creating a process of reconciliation, which I mentioned earlier, to heal the wounds among those perpetrators and victims. The UN and the EU must create commissions to monitor conflict that could lead to genocide. Preventive measures and early intervention could de-escalate tensions and mitigate conflict. And as have been said earlier, the UN Security Council Resolution 2150 of 2014 and of 16, which says that never again. These things should never happen. But whatever we do, at times we feel that men, they are the enemies of men themselves. Okay, by the way, I used to teach at University of Mauritius, and I used to cite an example, what is aggressivity, an attack of your same kind. I used to give one example, which is still vivid in my mind, and I would like to share it with you. Have you ever seen two dogs fighting? No one? And have you seen what happens when the weaker one goes down or run away? Do the victor attacks the one who is running away? No. On the contrary, let him go. But among human beings, when someone is running after an opponent with a knife, with an axe, if the opponent sit down or ask for begging, what do the aggressive one do? Do they spare that? Or do they fight again? So this is the nature of man. How can we fight this aggressive nature of human being, not only to their own relatives, friends, but to others also? And this is how I quote that human being or mankind is his own enemy whenever there is aggression. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Ambassador Dr. Luchman. Thank you very much for your address. And that example that you gave us, as you were speaking, the word for me, as I was listening to your speech, what came to mind was courage. In the moment when you have to do something, will you have the courage to do it? Because someone said courage, out of all the virtues, courage is the most important out of all the virtues, because without courage, you cannot practice all the other virtues consistently. So maybe my mission for this year, or for these 100 days, is to cultivate courage within myself, so that when the opportunity and the situation arises, I'll have the courage to do what needs to be done. So that's a challenge, I think, for all of us. At this moment in time, I would like us to watch another film, but also this film is reflections of survivors. And I think it's very, very important for us to know survivors by name and listen to themselves telling us their stories. So I would like us to watch the following film.
Muri Jenoside 94 nari mfite imyaka 16 nabanaga n'ababyeyi banjye n'abavandimwe. Mama yari umuforomokazi na papa yari umwarimu. Ubumwe bwari bwose nasigaye njyenyine. 18 rero nibwo bishobora bari muri stade harimo n'umuryango wanjye. Ibitero byaturutse ku misozi izengurutse stade, induru ari zose baza baririmba ati tubatsembatsembe, abantu bahungira nka bagateramo grenade. Mu by'ukuri amajwi yari menshi, abataka, imiborogo, imivu y'amaraso itemba. Papa nawe yatangiye atera amabuye, ariko bigeze aho ngaho baza kumurasa mu bitugu. Ahangaha baza kumurasa mu bitugu, ariko abantu batangiye kuraswa bateranaga n'amaraso. Tunakubatije izina ry'Imana Data na Mwana na Roho Mutagatifu. Abantu batangiye bataka, bigeze aho niba ari ubwoba bwashize, niba barakiye urupfu, sinzi uko nabyita, ariko byageze aho ngaho induru isigarana n'abica gusa, abandi baraceceka. Mama avanaho igitenge yari afite, akivanaho gutya, anyereka murumuna wanjye ati rero murumuna wawe nawe yapfuye, ati mwitonde, ati ituza, nunapfa upfe neza, ntacyo tukiramira. Nkumva ntashaka kubasiga, kandi none nkumva ntinya gupfa, nawe mpera ku muryango wanjye. Urwibutso ni amateka y'abacu, ariko njye mpafata nk'ahantu twongera kugirana umubano, twongera gusanga abacu. Ni mu rugo, ni iwacu, ndahakunda. Ubuzima bwa nyuma ya Jenoside rero si ubuzima bworoshye na gato, kuko cyane ku muntu wasigaye wenyine, nta n'icyo wasigaranye. Ni ubuzima bugoye cyane, kuko umuntu arimo nk'icyiza n'ikibi, umuntu ayifitemo n'urukundo, umuntu ayifitemo n'urwango, ariko byose biterwa n'uburyo yabyitwayemo. Niwe urwonsa akarushyira ku ibere, urwango rugakura. Niwe wonsa ikibi, n'urukundo niwe ururera, ararurera rugakura.
Natangiye kwiga kaminuza mu mwaka w'ibihumbi 2004. Niho rero twahuriye. Duhuriye mu muryango wa ARG, Association y'abanyeshuri bacitse ku icumu.
Gusa narayibonaga, uriya umuntu agukunda nawe ntabera. Ntabwo yanyemereye ako kanya, ndetse byaramvunye cyane.
Numva nanjye ndabohotse mu mutima, numva nishimiye kubana n'umuntu duhuje amateka, duhuje ibyishimo, duhuje umubabaro, tukabasha kubiviva, dutera intambwe mu buzima.
Mariage yacu yari nziza. Sosiyete nini twari dufite abanyeshuri, nk'abantu bakuru bari barimo benshi. Nicyo kibazo cya Jenoside gikomeye. Jenoside yigaragaza mu bihe byose, ariko cyane cyane ikigaragaza mu bihe by'ibyishimo. Nubwo bigoye, ariko ubuzima burakomeza, kandi ugaseka ukishima ukabaho. Dusibe icyuho abicanyi baduteye, tugire twuse ikivi cy'abacu.
Nuko numva umuryango wagiye uturemamo ibyiringiro. Numva bafite byinshi bakijije mu buzima bwanjye.
Intambara rero no kwihorera kwiza, no kwihorera ku rupfu, ndetse n'ababandi babibonaga nk'umupfu bakambona ko mfite ubuzima, kandi bakambona ko mbayeho neza. Ndabikunda. Numva ari inzira yo kwihorera, kuko nihorera ku rupfu n'ababigize, n'abashaka kurugiramo uruhare, cyangwa n'abanyirukanza bashaka kurugiramo uruhare, bakabona yuko nabayeho, ndiho.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very touching. What a beautiful family, but very intense story. There are many, many stories like that, but that was very positive and very encouraging. Thank you for choosing to show that story. At this point in time, it is my privilege to invite His Excellency Eugene Segore Kayihura, High Commissioner of Rwanda to South Africa. After His Excellency's address, I would like us to engage in a candle lighting ceremony. Each of you have been given a candle. Underneath the candle is a device that enables you to turn on the candle and turn it off. So when the time arises, after the address by His Excellency, I would like you to all please stand and then engage in the candle lighting ceremony. Your Excellency, thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, ambassadors and high commissioners, and members of the diplomatic corps. Tali Netz, director of the Johannesburg Genocide and Holocaust Center. Dr. Precious Moloi Mosepe, CEO of Mosepe Foundation, CEO of African Fashion International, and Chancellor of the University of Cape Town. Members of the Rwandan community in South Africa, friends of Rwanda, staff and members of the Johannesburg Genocide and Holocaust Center. Good afternoon once again. First of all, I really want to thank all of you for taking off your busy schedule to come and stand with us here, the people of Rwanda, on our Kwibuka 28. I really want to thank you for taking your time off your busy schedules to be here with us today. And I, on behalf of the High Commission of the Republic of Rwanda, wish to thank you all for always standing in solidarity with us during such tough times of our journey of rebuilding a formidable future. We thank the Johannesburg Genocide and Holocaust Center and the Rwandan diaspora in South Africa here for the support rendered in organizing this event. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Kwibuka marks the beginning of a series of activities for the 28th commemoration of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, and will last for 100 days up to 2nd July. And we shall be paying homage to the victims as we reflect on Rwanda's transformational journey under the theme, Remember, Unite, Renew, focusing on the legacy of strength, resilience, and unity that the young generation is called upon to uphold. We shall also be reflecting on how best we can encounter today's global challenges and future aspirations, making sense of the strides Rwanda has been able to make over the past quarter of a century as we carry forward the vision of our development trajectory. As we honor the memory of those who perished and stand united to comfort survivors of the atrocities, we also pay tribute to the sacrifices that brought Rwandan back to life, the unbreakable spirit of the RPA, to which we owe the restoration of peace and transformation of our country. We call upon all humanity to reflect on this part of Rwanda's history and to understand the lasting repercussions of genocide, because understanding the process leading to and the events of genocide is significant to preventing such massacres in the future. And as a new generation of young people emerges, we wish to nurture them to be agents of change, zealous to know more and analyze the history of Rwanda together with the genocide against the Tutsi. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we've had people world over denying the possible occurrence of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, but allow me to present to you some facts from international establishment findings and conclusions of the subject matter. Number one, the AU Assembly decision of 2018 designating 7th April of each year as the African Union Day of commemoration of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, and the UN General Assembly decision of 26 January 2018 designating 7th April as the International Day of the Reflection on the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Excellencies, historical clarity on the genocide against the Tutsi is the surest path to reconciliation. This is why all member states should actively support the excellent resolutions for which they voted unanimously. That's why every year, during such times of remembrance, we pay homage to those who lost their lives and ascribe much esteem to the Government of National Unity under the leadership of His Excellency Paul Kagame for not only bringing an end to the genocidal dark days, but also turning around and transforming the lives of Rwandans and the image of our nation from grief to glory. Excellencies, the government of Rwanda applauds the decision by the Paris Court of 15 February 2022 absolving the RPF on the downing of the former president's plane. I wish to inform you that since 2007, Rwanda has issued indictments and international arrest warrants for the 980 cases of genocide perpetrators living in 33 countries worldwide. But the response isn't that appeasing, saving from the groundbreaking domestic precautions back home with the help of Gacaca courts as a homegrown judicial remedy. These genocide suspects still at large are mainly the educated masterminds of the most heinous crimes currently enjoying legal protection in almost all continents, but mostly in Africa, Europe, and the Americas. We call on governments, number one, to cooperate and bring any genocide suspect and deniers of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi within their jurisdiction. We call on all governments to pass laws that punish genocide perpetrators to ensure that Rwandans suspected of committing any crimes against humanity are brought to justice. We call on all governments to respond to the indictments shared by extraditing genocide suspects to Rwanda or face justice in the host countries. We request countries to adopt laws punishing the crime of genocide and negationism. Excellencies, we should all know that denial is part of the genocidal process, and one has been continuous for the genocide against the Tutsi. It's high time we all started fighting denial as it manifests itself in different ways, including argument for double genocide, minimizing the number of victims of genocide, under the pretext of freedom of speech, where deniers promote hate and offensive speech through the denial of the genocide. We call on the genocide international community to stand together against the genocide ideology and get involved by preserving the facts about the genocide against the Tutsi, providing justice for the victims and fighting impunity, as well as enacting and enforcing laws that address attempts of revisionism and denial. The government of Rwanda respects the freedom of speech through Article 38 of the Constitution of Rwanda of 2003, revised in 2015, and the Law 59/2018 on the crimes of genocide ideology and related crimes punishes those who spread the genocide ideology and hate speech. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as friends around the world mourn the lives of the Rwandans lost during the 28th commemoration of genocide against the Tutsi, I would like to remind the audience here that one of the TV channels, DSTV, has dedicated one of the channels, channel 197, from the April 7th to April 13th. They will be showing the impact of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi on the Rwandan society and the subsequent process of reconciliation and healing. I call all of you, if you can, take your time and watch the channel. The inspirational and informative channel is set to launch on Thursday and will be available for 7 days until 13th of April. I want to thank DSTV for this service. Allow me to conclude by once again registering my sincere appreciation to Johannesburg Genocide and Holocaust Center, members of the Diplomatic Corps, and the Rwandan diaspora in South Africa and Friends of Rwanda. Thank you all for coming to stand in solidarity with the people of Rwanda. It is a sign that Rwandans are not alone. Your presence here today to commemorate this painful fate of our history is a sign of cohesion and benevolence, especially with the survivors of this tragedy, and sends a strong message that the international community is with us in this journey with a formidable resolve to walk the never again talk of preventing such tragedies from being repeated or happening anywhere on this earth. To my Rwandan brothers and sisters, and survivors in particular, be comforted, strong and resilient. Let's join efforts to rebuild ourselves and together overcome the impact of the genocide against the Tutsi. God bless you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. May I please request that we keep our candles on for the duration of the event. Thank you very much. Today we are also honored to have an exhibition that has been that is connected to this history, that has been created by artist Barry Salzman. And we are also pleased to have Mr. Salzman here to open the exhibition officially, but also to give us an address and talk to us about this very moving, very special exhibition. So it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Barry Salzman to address us.
Excellencies, representatives of government, members of the diplomatic corps, survivors of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, Director Nates, ladies and gentlemen. This is truly the most extraordinary honor. I get to talk about my artwork a lot to many different audiences, but standing here at Kwibuka 28 before representatives of the government of Rwanda, survivors of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, and family members of those who perished, is an honor that I will always cherish. Thank you. I grew up in Zimbabwe, and to be honest, I don't remember specifically learning about the Holocaust. It was just always there. My grandmother's sister had the Auschwitz tattoo, clearly stamped on her left forearm. We weren't allowed to ask her about it, but somehow we always knew the story, or so I thought. We think we know that story. The whole world thinks it knows the story of genocide, and so we stop empathizing, we stop paying attention, and we stop taking action. And by so doing, we become complicit in its recurrence. It is that recurrence, the recurrence of the ultimate crime against humanity, that is the focus of my art practice. My thought process, and by extension my work, is anchored in the ethics of seeing. How do we think about our individual and collective responsibility of bearing witness? To date, I have worked at sites of genocide in Poland, Ukraine, Namibia, and of course, Rwanda. As we gather here today, those same landscapes in Ukraine are yet again bearing witness to human atrocities. Later this year, I will travel to Bosnia to work on the landscapes around Srebrenica that bore witness to the genocide there in 1995. But today, I am here to talk to you about my work in Rwanda, But first, I would like to explain why I have dedicated 10 years of my art practice to looking at the topic of genocide. In 2013, I did a project that addressed the Holocaust. It included video of Auschwitz survivors recounting their experiences. And when that work screened at video and film festivals around the world, people would often respond in that familiar language of genocide fatigue by saying it was a narrative they knew. We may not know that lady in the white shirt, people would say to me, but we know her story. And I would always respond with a simple question. If we know that story so well, help me understand why we have repeated it 12 times since World War II. So I told you that I too thought I knew that story. But after spending 100 hours with Auschwitz survivors and their families in the summer of 2013, I realized that we will never know their story. We will never be able to comprehend what a victim of genocide endures. And it was then that I committed to myself that I would never stop trying. So in my resolve to challenge that jaded perception that we know the story, I embarked on what would be my ongoing body of work. I committed to exploring the recurrence of genocide and how we enable it. But how was I going to re-engage people in a different way about subject matter that they think they know? In my work, I presuppose that whatever we can learn from a didactic approach, the fact-based approach of the historian, the academic, the documentarian, or the journalist, has already been learnt. And still, we continue to perpetuate the cycle of the ultimate crime against humanity. So I needed to figure out a way to engage people differently. How do you engage people creatively to make aesthetic images instead of documenting brutal facts? So I set out to make work that leaves room for the imagination and allows place for personal interpretation. I came upon the idea of using the landscape in metaphoric ways to link places of genocide. It all happens under the same sky and on the same earth. But of course, it is we that are the true connective tissue between those atrocities. The landscape, like us, sees everything and does nothing. Like us, it stands by in full view of the atrocities being committed, and the trees shed their leaves in complicity and cover-up. But the landscape also rejuvenates, restores, and recovers. It carries with it the traces of the past and the promises of the future. It triumphs over trauma. It is inextricably intertwined with our darkest moments, but also our brightest days. Nowhere in the world is that story of triumph over trauma and of restoration and recovery more poignant than in Rwanda. I have titled my ongoing body of landscape works, How We See the World. It is a series of abstract landscapes from sites of 20th century genocide. In Rwanda, the metaphoric idea of landscape as witness is particularly fitting. There is no landscape in that small and beautiful country that did not bear witness to the atrocities of 1994. Let me show you a few of these landscapes so you know what I'm talking about. There you go. Many of you will recognize the location of this triptych as Lake Kivu in Rwanda. I made this work in the front yard of the church next door to Home St. John. The title of this work is A Ravaged Land Healing, 1, 2, and 3. And for me, this work captures the essence of what it is that I'm trying to say about the events of 1994 in Rwanda. The title of this work is Defiant Blooms. It is perhaps ironic that I go to great lengths to find very precise locations where acts of genocide have been perpetrated, and then I make these abstract pictures which could have been made anywhere. And there are two reasons for that. The one is my hope that it reminds us that that place can very quickly become any place. And secondly, my hope is that it gives the viewer, it gives the audience, a chance to interpret the work as their own, to place themselves in the picture. This work is called Beyond the Pictorial Dimension, from Nyamure sector in Rwanda. I think a lot about the concept of veils in my work, the metaphoric veils or filters through which we view history that somehow absolve us of our responsibility to honor our collective promise of never again. I can best explain it by thinking of a child who watches a scary movie through the gaps between their fingers. The movie hasn't changed. We know exactly what's going on, but somehow it allows us to be less afraid, less accountable, and less responsible. The final landscape I want to show you is called What Was and Will Be, and this is perhaps one of my most literal works, since it clearly talks to the idea of light breaking through the darkness. But what we're here to talk about today is the exhibition that will open after this afternoon's program, The Day I Became Another Genocide Victim. It is a series of 100 posthumous portraits of victims of the genocide as represented by what they were wearing on the last day of their lives. It is something completely different from my regular artwork. It is not the type of work that I make. The pictures you will see behind me, I did not set out to make those pictures. They do not feel like my work, unlike the landscapes, which is entirely mine. They're my ideas, my concept, my aesthetic treatment. I went looking for those landscapes. But the portraits, in The Day I Became Another Genocide Victim, that work found me. And let me explain what I mean by that. I was working in Rwanda on landscapes in April of 2018 under the guidance of two genocide activists, Paul Rukesha and Patrick Nkubana. I'm so very grateful to Paul and Patrick, as well as to the Aegis Trust and the Kigali Genocide Memorial for making my work in Rwanda possible. While I was there, a news story broke that a new mass grave had just been discovered in Kwibuka village, just on the outskirts of Kigali. The initial estimates were that there were 3,000 to 5,000 people buried there. So I went to the excavation site simply to give my work context. I wanted to better feel what had transpired on that land 24 years before. I had no intention of photographing there. We spent an emotional hour at the site as clothes were being piled up, still damp with earth. But then we continued onto our next landscape location. And for the next 2 days, I couldn't focus, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't get the piles of clothes out of my mind. Crumpled, muddied, and in growing heaps, they just seemed to further compound the dehumanizing way that their owners had lost their lives. I felt compelled to do something, but I wasn't sure what. So we got permission to return to the site. Working there with the CNLG volunteers, we started to separate the clothes, to consider each as the person it was. I felt that the need to lay out each of these garments one by one and photograph them as a portrait. And so we began to work. It was overwhelmingly emotional because both Paul and Patrick had identified where their family members had fallen by the clothes that had been recovered from a mass grave. And so it is with the deepest respect and sensitivity that I present this work, because I understand how confronting it is for Rwandans. The clothes take on heightened meaning because so frequently they were the only way to identify where loved ones had fallen. Soon after we started, I wanted to stop. We were working through tears. I wanted to spare Paul and Patrick from reliving their trauma. And in all honesty, I wanted to spare myself the emotional distress. But each time I had that overwhelming emotion, I challenged myself to continue. I thought about the words of French philosopher George Didi Huberman, and he writes, "Let us not invoke the unimaginable, but instead force ourselves into that oppressive place of imagining. Because the minute we stop imagining, the moment we invoke the unimaginable, we stop empathizing, we stop being present, and we become complicit in the problem." And so Didi Huberman implores us to continue to imagine. As you will notice in the portrait series when you take a closer look, each has a text in the first person. I was wearing my favorite party dress. I was wearing my little crocheted leggings. Sometimes I slept in them too. Or I was carrying my doggy backpack. The text is my invitation to you to work with me, to feel what I felt when I was making this work. I was shooting portraits of people. I was not making still lives of objects. This work is my effort to humanize the victims. We can never, ever comprehend what 1 million dead people is like, but we can readily imagine the life story of this little boy and his doggy backpack. He had a mother and a father and a grandmother and grandfather and uncles and friends and teachers. He lived at the very center of his own life story until the day he was murdered. Many of the portraits in this project are of children, and that was not intentional. I had asked the volunteers at the site to help me find complete garments as opposed to rags or fragments, because that helped me imagine the person that I was making the portrait of. After a while of shooting, I realized I was shooting a disproportionate number of children's clothes. So I asked this volunteer for a more representative sample of the people that had been murdered at the site. But she reminded me that I'd asked for complete garments, and most of the adults had been hacked to pieces by machete, and all that remained were rags and fragments. So it is in recognition of this truth, a truth we must imagine, that I have included a few partial garments in the exhibition of 100 works. I returned to Kwibuka in November of 2018. The excavation was complete. In total, they had recovered the remains of 84,439 people. That is a shockingly high number by any account, but all the more difficult to comprehend because that was almost 25 years after the genocide. When you start a project of this nature, where do you stop? Is one single shoe enough? Or do you just continue to shoot hundreds of thousands of images until our capacity to feel is numbed? And what about those you don't get to? I felt a responsibility to them too. But I remembered the story of a survivor, and she told how she had survived by pretending to be dead, lying under a pile of bloodied, dismembered bodies, when she heard one of the perpetrators say, "I just need one more and I'll have 100. Those words haunted me. I forced myself to imagine how that woman felt, fearing for her life and hearing the perpetrator reduce human life to a number. I just need one more and I'll have 100. If she could endure that, I could surely stay present to make 100 images and imagine the lives of those 100 people. But I stopped after the 100th image to honor that woman's story of survival. The last image in the series, as you will see, is an empty gray square. There is no object identifying a person. It's simply a barren gray square with the words, "We were." And that's in recognition of all those victims who will never be individually identified. I have questioned myself and have been challenged by others about whether, in fact, this is my story to tell. And in conclusion, I would like to explain to you why I think it is. And not only is it mine to tell, but it belongs to all of us, and we have a duty to never stop telling it. While we were in Rwanda, we were driving to a small, remote village to shoot a landscape, traversing potholes as big as the four-wheel drive vehicle we were in. And I asked, how in the world did the perpetrators get there? And I was reminded that they didn't. They were already there. As you heard earlier, many victims of the genocide were killed by somebody they knew. Citizen turned on citizen, neighbor on neighbor. People who had never killed before became murderers, family members, clergy, doctors, teachers, and so the list continues. Mostly, they were incited by simple propaganda spread over the radio. So we have to ask ourselves, what would it take for any one of us to hack someone we know to pieces with a machete? The events of 1994 in Rwanda warn us that it may not take very much. It reminds us that humanity hangs in precarious balance. I identify as part of this amorphous thing called humanity, and so do most of the people on this planet. What happened in Rwanda challenges our very understanding of what humanity is and highlights its fragility. I believe that gives each of us a claim to the history of the genocide in Rwanda. In fact, more than that, I believe it gives us each a responsibility to tell that story and to retell it in any way we can, as often as we can, to any audience we can. That is our duty to ensure a more humane tomorrow. In closing, in my faith, when we wish condolences to the family members of someone who's passed away, we wish them a long life. So today, on the 28th anniversary of the genocide against the Tutsi, I would like to wish all Rwandans a long life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Salzman, for that very moving presentation and for giving us the emotional details of the journey to creating this exhibition and your work in general. Thank you very much. I think you've touched on something very important in terms of we cannot understand the psychology of a person who would hack someone they know to death in pieces. It's very difficult to understand that, but we can understand our own human nature and work with our own human nature. As Ambassador Luchman reminded us, there's something in the human that is out of control and needs to be controlled, but we need to control our own human nature and understand ourselves. Thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now the end of this event. Thank you for your attendance and thank you for your patience in really absorbing all the addresses that took place today. I will invite you to please explore, when you have time, please explore this exhibition, and also in the coming days, if you have time to visit the center again, please come and view the exhibition and our permanent exhibition downstairs as well. There are some light refreshments that have been served that are waiting for all of us. So before you go, please enjoy the refreshments that are served to you. Until next year, thank you and good luck. Thank you.
mabi ya jenoside yakorewe abatutsi. Abanyarwanda twishyize hamwe turakora twiteze imbere kuko tuzi aho twavuye tuzi n'aho tugana. Intego yacu ni imwe ni ukubaka u Rwanda rushya.
Hari byinshi twagezeho ntabwo twifuza